The house had been too quiet since Jerome's death. Simone tried to keep it alive, dusting picture frames, opening windows, pretending silence wasn't swallowing her whole. The old place creaked even when the wind didn't blow, as if it was breathing all on its own. That morning felt ordinary. She'd finally decided to hire help, a young woman named Brianna, who came recommended by a neighbor. Just for the heavy cleaning, Simone had said over the phone. The attic, maybe the stairs. It's an old house. It collects more dust than memories. Brianna arrived right on time, shy but polite. Simone handed her the spare key, gave quick instructions, and left to run errands in town. Nothing unusual. Just another gray afternoon. It wasn't even an hour later when the phone rang. Simone nearly ignored it. She was standing in line at the grocery store, but something in her chest told her to answer. Hello. Silence first. Then a whisper. Mrs. Whitlock? Yes. Brianna's voice trembled. There's someone in your house. Simone's heart stopped. What do you mean, someone? I heard footsteps upstairs. The attic door's open now. I swear I closed it. A coldness ran through Simone's spine like ice water. Get out, she said. Right now. Get out of the house. By the time Simone reached the driveway, 2 police cars were already parked outside. Brianna sat on the porch, pale, hands shaking, her phone clutched like a lifeline. The officers searched every room, basement, bedrooms, attic. Dust everywhere, no sign of forced entry, no footprints, no open windows. No one's here, ma'am, one officer said, lowering his flashlight. Old houses make noise. Mice, pipes, wind through the beams. Happens all the time. But Simone knew her house. She knew the weight of its silence, the rhythm of its creaks. The air felt heavier now, disturbed, as though someone had just left moments before she arrived. Brianna refused payment. She mumbled apologies and promised never to return. That night, as Simone locked the doors, she caught something in the reflection of the hallway mirror, a shadow moving where no light should have been. She told herself it was imagination. Yet, deep down, she felt it. The house was no longer empty. Visual cue, a trembling phone glowing in a dark hallway, Simone frozen midair, listening to a whisper that changes everything. When the officers left, the silence settled over Simone like a heavy curtain. The echo of their boots faded down the gravel path, leaving her alone in the house she'd once called home. The rooms gleamed. Brianna had done her work well. The wooden floors shone, the windows breathed daylight again, and even the banister seemed lighter under Simone's touch. Yet something was wrong. The air felt disturbed. She couldn't explain it, but she could feel it. She walked through each room carefully, her footsteps echoing in the hollow quiet. The living room smelled faintly of lemon polish, but underneath lingered something else, a perfume she didn't recognize. It was faint, sweet, almost floral, like someone had passed by only moments ago. In the kitchen, a single plate sat on the counter. A sandwich, half-eaten, crusts curled dry at the edges. She hadn't made it. Brianna wouldn't have either. Simone's stomach twisted. The back door latch was loose, though she remembered locking it that morning. The curtains by the stairwell moved slightly, though no breeze passed through. Maybe the police were right, she murmured. Maybe it's just the house. That evening, she called Jerome's old friend, Alan, a retired officer who'd known them for years. He listened quietly, then laughed softly. Simone, you've been alone too long. Old houses play tricks, you know that. Pipes, drafts, old wood settling. She wanted to believe him. She tried. But when night fell, she noticed details she couldn't ignore. The guest room door, which had stayed closed since her husband's funeral, now stood open by an inch. The curtains inside swayed gently, though the window was sealed. She stood in the hallway, every hair on her arms rising, the shadows stretching longer around her feet. The clock ticked louder than usual, as if counting something down. Maybe Brianna left it open, Simone whispered to herself, but her voice didn't sound convinced. She closed the door, locked it, and turned away. Yet as she reached the stairs, a soft click echoed behind her, the unmistakable sound of that same door unlatching again. Simone froze. The house, clean and quiet, felt alive. Watching. Visual cue, dust motes drifting through cold sunlight. Simone stands frozen as a door creaks open just behind her. The first sound came just past midnight, a slow, deliberate creak above the bedroom ceiling. Simone froze under the blanket, her eyes fixed on the plaster overhead. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't pipes. It was steps. Measured, human, moving from one end of the attic to the other. For a long moment, she told herself to breathe. Old houses make noise, she reminded herself, but she knew the difference between wood shifting and weight pressing down. The sound came again, a faint drag, like fabric brushing across the floorboards. Then silence. She waited, every nerve awake, her heart thudding against her ribs. The clock on the nightstand ticked too loudly. When she finally gathered the courage to move, she switched on the lamp. Nothing. The room stood still. In the morning, she called Brianna, her voice trembling. "Did you ever hear anything when you were cleaning?" Brianna was quiet for a long time before whispering. "It wasn't just footsteps, Mrs. Whitlock. I heard humming. Like someone trying not to be heard." Then, almost apologetically, she added, "Please don't ask me to come back. I can't." The line went dead. That evening, Simone told Alan, who again laughed it off. "Mice. Raccoons, maybe. Get someone to check the insulation." But the sounds didn't stop. They grew bolder, closer. Some nights it was the soft tap-tap of footsteps. Other nights, something heavier, a faint thud, a scrape, like someone dragging a chair. Once, she heard whispering. Not words, just the rhythm of speech. She held her breath to listen. The moment she did, it stopped. By the third night, she couldn't sleep. She lit a candle and sat in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling vent. The flame flickered though the air was still. "Who's there?" she whispered. Silence. Then, one faint sound, a breath. Her own reflection in the mirror looked pale, unfamiliar, almost frightened of her. Simone pressed her palms together, trembling. The attic light, which hadn't worked in years, flickered once through the cracks of the ceiling boards, a single pulse of dim yellow. That was when she realized the truth she'd been avoiding. Someone, or something, was living above her. Visual cue, candlelight flickering across Simone's face as she stares upward. Ceiling vent shadow trembling, her eyes wide with fear. For 3 nights, Simone barely slept. The sounds above her head had stopped, but the silence now felt heavier, watchful, like something holding its breath. At sunrise, she climbed the stairs toward the attic, each step groaning under her weight. The narrow hallway smelled of old paint and cedar. Dust motes floated through the pale light as if the air itself remembered things she didn't want to know. The attic door stood at the end, thick wood, paint peeling, and a heavy padlock bolted across it. She hadn't noticed the lock before. It was new, silver against the dark frame, its surface too clean for such an old door. Her pulse quickened. She ran her fingers over the cold metal. "Jerome must have put this here," she whispered. "But why?" Later that evening, when she asked him, he barely looked up from the newspaper. "It's unsafe," he said simply. "The floorboards are weak. Last time I was up there, I nearly fell through." She stared at him. "When was that?" He hesitated, just for a heartbeat, then said, "A few months ago. Don't worry about it." But she did worry. The next afternoon, while Jerome was out for groceries, she went into his study. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and old wood polish. She pulled open every drawer, pens, invoices, papers, until her fingers brushed against something taped under the bottom edge. A key. Small, brass, and old. Her heart pounded as she climbed the stairs again, the key cold and damp in her palm. The padlock clicked open with a hollow metallic sigh. She pushed the door slowly. The air that rushed out was colder than the rest of the house. Dry, stale, carrying the scent of dust and old linen. The dim light barely reached the corners. Boxes sat stacked like quiet sentinels, and in the far end stood an old trunk, its lid slightly ajar. "Hello," she called, her voice cracking. For a moment, nothing. Then, faintly, a sound. A breath. Her candle trembled. She stepped closer, the floor creaking softly beneath her feet. When she opened the trunk, only folded blankets stared back. Still, she felt it, the certainty that she was not alone in that attic. Visual cue, a trembling key turning in an old lock. The door creaks open as light spills into darkness and dust swirls like ghosts in the air. Simone stood in the dim attic, the dust thick enough to taste. Her pulse still hadn't slowed from the moment she'd heard that faint breath. She told herself it was the wind, a trick of the old rafters, yet she couldn't bring herself to leave. Something in the shadows pulled at her, a whisper from the past asking to be found. The old trunk sat waiting, its brass hinges dull with age. Inside lay stacks of folded quilts, brittle newspapers, and a few faded books whose pages stuck together. Beneath it all, she found a photo album wrapped in yellowed lace. The cover, once blue, had faded to the color of ash. She sat on the floor, the candle trembling beside her, and opened it. Most of the pictures were black and white, young Jerome in his army uniform, smiling beside old cars and nameless friends. But tucked halfway through the album was a photograph that didn't belong. It was newer, clearer, the colors still warm after all these years. Jerome again, but younger, early 20s, hair longer, eyes softer. His arm was around a woman who looked almost like Simone. The resemblance struck her like a ghostly mirror, same dark hair, same narrow smile, but this woman's eyes were brighter, bolder, as if she'd never learned fear. The bottom edge of the picture was torn, jagged, as if ripped from someone's hand. Simone turned it over. On the back, written in faded blue ink, were the words, "To my dearest Alana, my beginning and my end." Alana. The name meant nothing, and yet, when she whispered it aloud, the attic seemed to shift, as though the wood itself recognized it. She stared at the woman's face, tracing the curve of her smile with her thumb. Something about it felt intimate. Too intimate. Jerome had never mentioned anyone named Alana. Not once. She flipped through the rest of the album, searching for another clue, but the pages were blank after that photo, all torn out, cleanly removed. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked. Slow, deliberate. Simone looked toward the attic stairs, clutching the picture tightly, her fingers trembling. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she had uncovered a secret, or if the secret had just awakened. Visual cue, close-up of trembling hands holding an aged photograph, the image of Jerome smiling beside a woman who looks hauntingly like Simone. Simone waited until dinner to bring up the photograph. Jerome sat at the table, calmly reading the newspaper, his silver-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose. The aroma of roasted chicken filled the air, but the tension between them was thicker than the steam from the food. "I found something," she began softly. He didn't look up. In the attic. An old photo album. There's a picture of you, with a woman. Her name was Alana. At that, the paper froze midair. For a fraction of a second, his eyes flicked up, sharp, startled, then softened again. "Alana," he repeated, too slowly. "That was years ago. A childhood friend. She died in a car accident when we were 20. Poor girl." He said it too easily, too neatly. Simone studied him. "You never mentioned her." He folded the paper with precise care. "Because it doesn't matter. That was a lifetime ago, Simone. You're imagining things again." The words hit harder than she expected. Again. As if she were the problem. That night, she placed the photograph on her bedside table. It felt like a small anchor in a sea of doubt. But when she woke the next morning, it was gone. The album too. She searched the entire attic, the trunk, the boxes, the shelves. Nothing. The key she'd used to open the lock had vanished from her drawer. "Jerome," she said at breakfast, trying to keep her voice steady. "Did you take the album?" He looked at her with mild confusion. "What album?" Her throat went dry. That night, when she went to plug in her phone, the charger had been moved, placed neatly on the windowsill, far from where she'd left it. The small, thoughtless movement sent a chill through her chest. Someone had been in her room. At 2 a.m., she woke to a faint glow filtering through the cracks of the attic door, a soft, steady light. Her pulse pounded. She crept halfway up the stairs, each step cold against her bare feet. Then behind the door, a shadow passed, slow and deliberate. Simone's breath caught. Downstairs, she heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in a lock. Visual cue, a faint line of light under a closed attic door. A dark silhouette moves silently past it as Simone watches, frozen in fear. For 2 nights, Simone didn't sleep. The light in the attic flickered on and off at impossible hours, and Jerome's explanations had grown thinner. The wiring, the draft, your imagination. His patience was running out, and so was hers. By the 3rd morning, she made her choice. She waited until he left for the market. The moment his car disappeared down the street, she climbed the stairs, heart hammering like a drum. The padlock had been replaced again, newer this time, shiny brass, as if mocking her. She gripped a hammer from the toolbox and struck. Once. Twice. The sound cracked through the still air. On the 3rd hit, the lock snapped open, clattering to the floor. The attic door groaned as it swung inward. A wave of cold air met her, heavy with dust and something else, something human. Not decay, not rot. Just living air, stale from being breathed too long. Her flashlight trembled as she stepped inside. The beam caught fragments of life where no one should be living. A narrow bed, a chipped mug with a spoon, a small heater, and a stack of notebooks filled with frantic handwriting. Near the far wall stood an old typewriter, its keys smudged with ink and fingerprints. Simone's breath came shallow. "Hello," she whispered. Something moved under a blanket in the corner. Her light jumped, and a shape began to stir. Slow, uncertain. Then, out of the folds, a hand appeared. Thin, ghost-pale, trembling. The blanket slid back, and Simone found herself staring at a woman. Her skin was ashen, her hair tangled, her eyes wide and terrified of the light. "Who are you?" Simone breathed. The woman flinched, shielding her face. Her voice came out as a rasp, barely audible. "Please, don't tell him I'm here." The words hung in the cold air, shattering every lie Jerome had ever told. Simone's legs weakened beneath her. "Tell who?" But the woman only shook her head, curling tighter beneath the blanket like a wounded animal. Simone's flashlight flickered, sweeping across the floor, catching a framed photograph near the bed. Jerome's face smiled up from it, younger, gentler, next to the same woman now hiding before her. The secret was no longer above her. It was alive. Visual cue, a trembling flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, stopping on a pale human face, eyes wide, lips whispering, "Please don't tell him I'm here." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The pale woman sat huddled under the blanket, eyes darting from Simone to the doorway, as though expecting someone to appear. Finally, Simone knelt, lowering her voice to a whisper. "It's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." The woman's lips trembled. "You shouldn't be here. He'll be angry if he finds you." Simone's stomach turned. "Who?" "Jerome." The woman froze at the name, then gave a small, broken nod. Her fingers twisted the blanket in her lap. "He promised no one would know. He said the world forgot me long ago." Simone stared, unable to breathe. "Who are you?" The answer came soft, barely a breath. "My name is Alana Whitlock." The name struck Simone like a lightning flash through fog. Alana. The woman from the photograph. The one Jerome swore was dead. She couldn't stop staring. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He told me you died." Alana's laugh was hollow, a sound scraped raw by years of silence. "He wanted me to. After the fire, I was ruined. Half my face burned, my body weak. He said no one could see me like this. He said it was mercy to keep me hidden." Her voice broke, tears sliding down her ashen cheeks. "He built this attic for me. Said it would keep me safe. At first, I believed him. I thought he was protecting me from pity, from whispers. But days turned to years. Years into decades." Simone felt the cold settle into her bones. "How long have you been here?" Alana looked toward the window, where dust hung like frost in the air. 31 years. The number stole Simone's breath. In the dim light, she noticed the notebooks piled near the bed. Hundreds of them, pages filled with cramped, trembling handwriting. "You've been writing all this time?" Alana nodded faintly. "Stories. Memories. Things he couldn't bury. My name used to mean something, you know. I was a writer before the fire." Simone reached for one notebook and read the title scrawled on the cover, "The Woman in the Attic." Candlelight flickered across the pages, illuminating words written by a ghost who had never truly died. Visual cue, candlelight dancing over wrinkled pages, ink-stained hands turning a notebook titled "The Woman in the Attic." Simone sat in the darkened attic long after Alana's voice had faded into silence. Her hands trembled as she pressed the record button on her phone. Every word mattered now. Every confession would be proof that the nightmare she'd uncovered was real. She asked softly, "Alana, why didn't you try to escape?" Alana smiled faintly, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He locked the doors. He told me the world wouldn't want to see me, that no one would believe I was still alive. I believed him. He made me believe." Simone's heart cracked. She promised her quietly, "He'll never keep you hidden again." When Jerome's car finally pulled into the driveway, the sound of the engine made Simone's pulse race. She helped Alana down the narrow stairs, her frail body shaking with each step. They reached the living room just as Jerome entered, humming as though the world outside had never changed. He froze. The color drained from his face. "Simone, what are you doing?" Simone stood between him and Alana. "You told me she was dead." Jerome's gaze darted from Simone to the fragile woman behind her. His voice cracked, part disbelief, part horror. "You weren't supposed to. You don't understand. She was sick. She couldn't live out there. People would have pitied her, mocked her. I kept her safe." "Safe?" Simone hissed. "You locked her in the dark for 30 years. He sank to his knees, shaking. "I did it out of love. I couldn't face losing her. I couldn't let anyone see what the fire took from us." Simone's voice turned cold. "You didn't lose her, Jerome. You buried her alive." She stepped back and pressed the phone in her pocket, the recording still running. The police arrived within minutes. As officers led Jerome out in handcuffs, the morning light spilled through the front windows. Alana stood by the door, frail and blinking at the dawn she hadn't seen in decades. Simone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Alana whispered, almost smiling, "It's colder than I remember, but it's beautiful." She didn't last long after that, her body too weak, her spirit too tired, but when she passed, she did so free. Visual cue, red and blue police lights flashing across the old house as the sun rises. Simone watching from the doorway, holding Alana's trembling hand. Months passed, and the house finally began to breathe again. The locks were gone, the attic door left open to sunlight for the first time in decades. Dust no longer gathered like ghosts on the floorboards. It was still old, still creaky, but the silence no longer frightened Simone. It felt like peace. Jerome's trial made headlines for weeks, though Simone avoided the noise. The world debated whether he was a monster or a man broken by guilt, but she no longer cared for the opinions of strangers. Justice had already been served in the only way that mattered. The truth was no longer trapped in darkness. One morning, a plain brown package arrived at her doorstep. The sender's name was unfamiliar. L.W. Publishing. Inside, nestled between soft tissue paper, was a bound manuscript wrapped in a simple white ribbon. On the cover, in neat black print, it read, "The Woman in the Attic," by Alana Whitlock. Simone's breath caught. Her hands trembled as she untied the ribbon and opened to the first page. It began not with pain or fear, but with gratitude, the kind that blooms from suffering and somehow becomes love. Alana's voice filled the pages, honest and fragile, telling the story of a life hidden away and the stranger who gave it light again. By the time Simone reached the end, tears blurred the words. The last page held a single, handwritten line, Alana's final note. "To the woman who set me free." Simone pressed her fingers to the ink, as if she could still feel the warmth of Alana's hand. Months later, the book climbed bestseller lists around the world. Readers wept, wrote letters, and spoke of forgiveness, endurance, and truth. But Simone never gave interviews, never took credit. She didn't need to. The world knew Alana's name now, not as a ghost, but as a voice. Every morning, Simone placed the book on the table near the window, letting the sunlight fall across its cover. The pages curled slightly from the warmth, alive with the faint scent of old paper and renewal. Sometimes, when the house was especially quiet, she thought she could hear Alana's typewriter again. Soft, steady, and free. Visual cue: a book lies open on a sunlit table, dust dancing in the light, the quiet piece of a story finally told.